The U.S. Senate is considering legislation that I've been worried about for years, and I've warned you about it repeatedly. When I speak about the hyper-militarization of our police and the destruction of the firewall that separates domestic police from military activity, this is it. And if you've ever listened to anything I have ever said, I beg you, listen now. This law seeks to permit the incarceration and imprisonment of people, including American citizens here, indefinitely and without any charges being filed. Remember, it's part of the incremental and deliberate dissolution of criminal due process and constitutional law protections under the increasingly insidious war on terror, the magic incantation that turns your brain off. It's called the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2012. It will give any president the authority to indefinitely imprison you without being charged and without a trial, both in foreign countries and here. If enacted, Sections 1031 and 1032 of the NDAA would do three things. And listen. 1, it would authorize the federal government to indefinitely imprison you without charges and without a trial inside and outside of these United States. 2, it would mandate the military detention of some civilians, Americans who would not usually be subject to military jurisdiction, including American civilians like you, picked up within the United States itself. And 3, the law would transfer to the Department of Defense all powers and jurisdiction now held by the Department of Justice for prosecution, investigation, law enforcement, as well as incarceration and imprisonment. Imagine you're being picked up here or in London or Toronto, thrown into a military prison and held indefinitely. That's what this law is all about. Senator Lindsey Graham emphasized that the homeland is now part of the battlefield. We didn't know each other in 2002, but I was warning talk radio sheeple about that guy Jose Padilla, an American citizen, Brooklyn-born no less. Jose Padilla was arrested in Chicago and immediately labeled an enemy combatant. Remember that? Then he was held for 3.5 years somewhere. No charges, no bond, no lawyer, no nothing. And he went crazy. Finally, they had a change of heart and sentenced him to 17 years in Supermax. And when the ridiculous argument went back and forth about how he was not entitled to a civilian trial but a military tribunal, I warned then that that was a beta test. And I was right. Now it's happening. They're going to do this to us here and now. The Constitution is being destroyed. So wake up and comment as you see fit.
What is wrong with you?
Under the provisions, would it be possible that an American citizen then could be declared an enemy combatant and sent to Guantanamo Bay and detained indefinitely?
I think that as long as that individual, no matter who they are, if they pose a threat to the security of the United States of America, should not be allowed to continue that threat.
To continue that threat, I'm infuriated by Senator McCain's nonsensical and unconstitutional answer. I'm sure our next guest is too. Senator Rand Paul was questioning Senator McCain on our top story tonight. A bill written in secret by Senator McCain and Senator Carl Levin that would give the U.S. military and not civilian law enforcement agencies the ability to arrest anyone and hold that person indefinitely, even if that person is an American arrested on American soil. Here to discuss this frustrating development is Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul. Before we get into the politics of who voted for it and who voted against it, what's your take on what's going on here? I mean, everybody in the Senate took an oath to uphold the Constitution, which says no person, doesn't even say no American, it says no person shall be denied life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And here they go ahead and vote for legislation that denies it.
Well, you know, we had a discussion about this among some Republicans at lunch, and one other Republican senator read from the Constitution and pointed out all the places where you are guaranteed a trial by a jury, while you're guaranteed speedy trial, while you're guaranteed habeas corpus, you're guaranteed all these rights. And it does strike me as perplexing that anyone could vote to send an American citizen who's been accused of a crime to a detention center in a foreign land without due process. Really is beyond me.
What justification did these people give for this? They all took, I'm talking about your fellow Republicans, I think only Senator Kirk from Illinois joined you. Even Mike Lee voted for this, a shocking development, which he and I will discuss in another show. But what are the Republicans trying to accomplish when they defy the Constitution, which they took an oath to uphold?
Well, here's what most of them argued. Most of them argued that Hamdi and Quirin, two Supreme Court cases, have justified holding U.S. citizens as enemy combatants. They also argued that the Padilla case did, but that wasn't a Supreme Court case. I guess my point is that I agreed with Scalia, who was the dissent in the Hamdi case, and who said that really high treason has been tried in our courts usually, and it is the exception to ever give up our rights. It's happened during war. But my point about this is a war without end. I'm afraid of giving up the right to trial by jury and hoping that someday they will declare an end to this war and they'll give back the right to trial by jury. It really concerns me. And one thing only that is protecting American citizens, and that's our Constitution, the checks we put on government power. Should we err today and remove some of the most important checks on state power in the name of fighting terrorism, well, then the terrorists have won. Detaining citizens without a court trial is not American. In fact, this is an alarming, arbitrary power that is reminiscent of what Egypt did with its permanent emergency law. This permanent emergency law allowed them to detain their own citizens without a court trial. Egyptians became so alarmed at that in the last spring that they overthrew their government. Recently, Justice Scalia affirmed this idea in his dissent in the Hamdi case, saying, where the government accuses a citizen of waging war against it, our constitutional tradition has been to prosecute him in federal court for treason or another crime. Scalia concluded by saying, the very core of liberty secured by our Anglo-Saxon system of separated powers has been freedom from indefinite imprisonment at the will of the executive. Justice Scalia was, as he often does, following the wisdom of our founding fathers. As Franklin wisely warned, those who give up their liberty for security may wind up with neither. And really, what security does this indefinite detention of Americans give us? The first and flawed premise, both here and in the badly misnamed Patriot Act, is that our pre-9/11 police powers were insufficient to stop terrorism. This is simply not borne out by the facts. Congress long ago made it a crime to provide or conspire to provide material assistance to al-Qaeda or other foreign terrorist organizations. Material assistance includes virtually anything of value: legal, political advice, education, books, newspapers, lodging, or otherwise. The Supreme Court sustained the constitutionality of this sweeping prohibition. We have laws on the books that can prosecute terrorists before they commit acts of terrorism. Know good and well that someday there could be a government in power that is shipping its citizens off for disagreements. There are laws on the books now that characterize who might be a terrorist. Someone missing fingers on their hands is a suspect, according to the Department of Justice. someone who has guns, someone who has ammunition that is weatherproofed, someone who has more than 7 days of food in their house can be considered a potential terrorist. If you are suspected by these activities, do you want to have the government have the ability to send you to Guantanamo Bay for indefinite detention? A suspect. We're not talking about someone who has been tried and found guilty. We're talking about someone suspected of activities. But some of the things that make you suspicious of terrorism are having food, having more than 7 days of food, missing fingers on your hand, having ammunition, having weatherproofed ammunition, having several guns at your house. Is that enough? Are you willing to sacrifice your freedom for liberty? I would argue that we should strike these detainee provisions from this bill because we are giving up our liberty. We are giving up the constitutional right to have due process before we're sent to a prison. This is very important. I think this is a constitutional liberty we should not look at and blithely sign away to the executive power or to the military. So I would call for support of the amendment that will strike the provisions on keeping detainees indefinitely, particularly the fact that we could now, for the first time, send American citizens to prisons abroad. I think that is a grave danger to our constitutional liberty, and I advise a vote to strike these provisions from the bill. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back my time.